I want to give you some amazing news and ask you why you haven't heard this everywhere. I want to read this story from Time magazine. Time.com came out yesterday afternoon. Since the start of the public impeachment hearings in Congress last month, Andriy Yermak, a top advisor to the president of the Ukraine, has heard his name come up again and again in witness testimony. He took part in many of the events at the center of the impeachment inquiry. I want you to listen to that. His name has come up again and again. In fact, his name is mentioned in the impeachment inquiry dozens of times. He was at many of the events that were, quoting, at the center of the impeachment inquiry. And a 300-page report last week by the inquiry mentions Yermak by name dozens of times. But in his first interview about those public hearings, Yermak has questioned the recollections of, this is Time magazine, of crucial witnesses into the impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump's alleged abuse of his office for political gain. So the guy who is at the center of the events that make the impeachment inquiry, the guy who is quoted, the guy who is, they say, all of them said, oh, no, he was there. He's now saying, I don't think the witnesses remember this correctly. Yermak told Time magazine in an interview on December 4th, listen, I want to tell you straight. Of course, now, when I watch these shows on television, my name often comes up, and I see people there whom I recognize, whom I have met, and whom I know, he says, referring to the witness testimony. That is their personal opinion, especially the positions they expressed while under oath. But I have my own truth. I know what I know. The most crucial point at which Yermak's recollection contradicts the testimony of the inquiry's witnesses relates to a meeting in Warsaw on September 1st, when Ukrainian President Zelensky met with Vice President Mike Pence. Do you remember this? The story is that they were meeting, and all of a sudden, Mike Pence just ended the meeting quickly, and they walked out. And the ambassadors, they all had to corner Mr. Yermak and say, I am sorry for that. I don't know. I mean, look, you just have to do what the president says, or you're not going to get any of this aid. That's what the witnesses said. This was the only time that we have anybody saying quid pro quo. Most crucial point is his recollection that contradicts the testimony of the inquiry's witnesses. The meeting was part of an ongoing effort by the Zelensky administration to improve ties with the Trump administration. One of the American diplomats who attended that meeting, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, testified before the inquiry last month that he, quote, pulled Yermak aside after the meeting and delivered an important message. U.S. aid to Ukraine would probably not resume until Zelensky's government announced 2 investigations that could implicate President Trump's political revivals. Quote, I told Mr. Yermak that I believed that the resumption of the U.S. aid would likely not occur until Ukraine took some kind of action on the public statement that we had been discussing for many weeks, end quote. That's the testimony. Now let's see what Mr. Yermak says. This statement was allegedly intended to announce 2 investigations, one into the discredited claims that Ukraine helped Hillary Clinton's campaign. Notice this is not a friendly article to Donald Trump. Notice they say the discredited claims that Ukraine helped Hillary Clinton's campaign, and another related to the work that Hunter Biden, the son of the presidential candidate Joe Biden, did for Ukrainian gas company Burisma Holdings. Based on testimony from Sondland and other witnesses, the final report from the House Intelligence Committee concluded last week that Sondland made this offer of a quid pro quo clear to Yermak that day in Warsaw. following that meeting, Ambassador Sondland pulled aside President Zelensky's advisor, Mr. Yermak, to explain that the hold on security assistance was conditioned on public announcement of the Burisma Biden and 2016 election interference investigations, quoting the report. Yermak, however, according to Time magazine, disputes this. Quote, Gordon and I, the ambassador from the U.S., were never alone together, he said when Time magazine asked about the Warsaw meeting. Quote, we bumped into each other in the hallway next to the escalator as I was walking out. He recalls that several members of the American and Ukrainian delegation were also nearby, as well as bodyguards and hotel staff, though he was not sure whether any of them heard his brief conversation with Sondland. And I remember everything, quoting Yermak, and I remember everything. Everything is fine with my memory. We talked about how well the meeting went, and that's all we talked about, Yermak says. Stu, help me out here. That's kind of a big deal, don't you think?
I think so, yeah. I mean, they even say these comments cast doubt on an important moment in the impeachment inquiry's reconstruction of events, specifically the only known point at which an American official directly tells the Ukrainians about the link between U.S. aid and the announcement of specific investigations.
They have said the whole time, we didn't know this. They didn't say that this was tied together. And Sondland, remember, changed his testimony. Mm-hmm. He changed his testimony.
Yeah.
And that's when he said, okay, I did tell Yermak this. And that was the only thing that the impeachment inquiry could hang their hat on as someone who was firsthand doing it. It was Sondland. Now Yermak says, and I think this is really important, and I remember everything. Everything is fine with my memory. We talked about how well the meeting went, and that's all we talked about, end quote. In a statement, Sondland's lawyer said Ambassador Sondland stands by his prior testimony, I'm not sure which one that was, and will not comment further. In his initial testimony to the impeachment inquiry in October, Sondland said he never knew the U.S. aid in Ukraine was conditional on the investigations that Trump wanted. But the following month, Sondland amended his testimony with a sworn statement in which he described the conversation with Yermak in Warsaw. Oh, now I recall speaking individually with Mr. Yermak, where I said the resumption of aid would likely not occur, and we had been discussing that for many weeks. So was he lying the first time, or was he lying the second time? And this is not a rhetorical question now. This is perjury, because the guy who he said he talked to says there's nothing wrong with my memory. I never had that conversation.
Well, one of them's lying. I mean, it could also be the guy from Ukraine, undoubtedly. And you know, it would. There's an argument, and they make it in this story, that it makes sense. You know, they're still dependent on the U.S. for funding. I mean, the same thing that would have made them do this in the first place, which was to please Trump and to get the funding, could make them do this time.
So let me
However,
say
we don't have evidence of that, and it certainly brings up a massive question. And you know, if let's just say you came up with this idea to impeach a president and actually did an investigation and did a legitimate inquiry instead of the crap that they did the last couple of weeks,
you'd have
maybe
this
they'd
already.
have this, they'd be able to sort this out.
Right.
Instead, they're just jumping to it and assuming the worst in every single circumstance to get their political ends.
So I thought about that. I thought, okay, well, so what they're doing is they're relying on aid, blah, blah, blah. We're just a few months away from an election, okay? If you thought that Donald Trump was going to be impeached and removed from office, you would shut your mouth. You would not. You would not start taking this case apart. You just shut your mouth because I need aid. So best case scenario is he's making this up because he's seen what the case is and sees this case is going nowhere. He's not going anywhere. And beyond that, the Democrats are so weak, they will not win in the next election. Otherwise, you just shut your mouth until someone asks you in an authoritarian position.
Yeah, why do an interview with Time magazine about it?
Why do it?
Yeah.
Why do it? You are undermining the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean,
And you just don't do that unless you know who's going to win, or you think you know.